Hello and a very warm welcome to part 2 of this repair video on my 2008 Smart Fortwo 451. It's an 84 brake horsepower turbo model and I'm going to be replacing a Lambda probe and also some exhaust components. Over the last week many components have arrived. I've placed quite a few orders, various prices. I've spent quite a bit of money. Some parts were a lot more expensive than I had expected, others were reasonable value. So here we have various new components, and I will give prices, approximate prices on all of these to give you an indication of what the spending was. So here we have the springs. These were around £5–6 each. These bolts were also £5 or £6. These sealing washers, and the interesting thing is this just goes to show how much was missing. Here's the old one. These were just under £15 each. Elbow pipe was £57, and the NTK Lambda probe, I think that was about 50. It's interesting to note that inside this elbow is one of these sealing washers. You can just see here the upper part of it, and the conical section will be in here. Now, as that is sandwiched between here and here, clearly when this wears down there's no way of replacing it, so it's a case of replacing this. So this is technically a consumable part when you're replacing other exhaust components. And it's clear when we look at the state of this in here that there wasn't much left of that sealing washer in this elbow. So the reduced distance here combined with the reduced distance here, when you think this should have been packed out with a washer of this thickness but was instead packed out with this, means that this whole arrangement wasn't operating correctly as a sprung loaded joint with the correct clearances, hence this rubbing against the inside of the outlet of the turbo. So bit of a mess really. And it's going to be interesting putting this back together to see just how different this arrangement is. Now, for ease of access, I opted to remove this rear cross panel, and it's very simple to remove. There are just some Torx bolts each side, one that goes through there, one through there, and then underneath there is also one that bolts from the back through to a threaded section in here. So 3 Torx bolts per side. They were tight. They weren't seized. I think give it another couple of years they probably would have been, so I will be putting some copper slip on those threads when I reassemble them. But the removal of this gives much better access to the bolts for the exhaust, and it's so easy to remove there's no reason not to do it. So to get started I'm going to fit these sealing rings onto these pipes here. Very straightforward, they're just press fit. It's important to not damage them. They actually come quite well protected in the packaging, so I think they probably are potentially quite brittle. They're both the same at either end, so you don't have to worry about using the right ones. Time to fit the new Lambda probe. This is an NTK. I have compared the connector, which is the same. Dimensionally it's the same as well. Remove this little cap here. Now these usually come with a little bit of grease on the threads here. I think it's molybdenum disulfide, a bit like CV grease. When it's the same colour, it could be something very different. But it just lubricates the thread. You don't really want to contaminate this end with anything, so it's important not to get any grease or anything on that, especially silicone, which was the cause, allegedly the cause of the fuel contamination crisis all those years ago. So start the thread off till it meets resistance. It's 22mm, and then tighten it carefully. It has like a crush sealing washer on it. Don't want to go mad tightening it, but just tighten it nice and firmly. Judging by how hard the other one was to get out, it seems they corrode quite nicely into position after a while anyway. And that's done. Now I know what angle this needs to be roughly positioned at. Definitely get the bolt behind in first. It's a bit of a pig. The language was pretty bad, so I did stop the camera. It was very fiddly with my great big hands. And then obviously we can get on to fitting this. It's all a bit fiddly unless you've got tiny hands. So I'm now just going to evenly tighten these two. I don't want to tighten it too much. I still want this to be flexible enough to be able to adjust the alignment of this when I go to fit the exhaust silencer, and then I can carry out the final tightening at the end. Accessibility is improved considerably by using a 1/4 inch drive socket and a UJ universal joint, and it's important to tighten these evenly. I've now returned the silencer to the car, and we can get the alignment settled here, and we can begin to refit the springs and the bolts here and here, and then set up the final alignment of this setup. Just carrying out final tightening to these bolts. At this point it's interesting to note this clearance here, because there was no clearance here before, and the amount that this spring is compressed just shows how much potential there is for wear in this joint. Now I'm thinking the spring, this as these packing rings wear down, I guess this distance just decreases over time, but this is how it would have been when it was new. Just an interesting comparison. Everything's tight, everything is aligned, the exhaust is refitted on its hangers, and now it's just a case of reconnecting the Lambda sensors. The number 2 sensor connects just under here, and the number 1 sensor connects in the engine bay, so it will be a case of removing the engine cover to access the connector block. The connector block for this number 1 sensor is right here. It's reconnected and it's back in its clip. Well, mechanically everything's back together now, so I can clear the fault codes down from where the ignition has been on while things have been disconnected, and get things fired up before I put the panels back on. Now I had considered replacing this number 1 sensor while everything was off. My main concern was that given the amount of effort that it took to get the number 2 sensor out, was that I didn't want to risk damaging, fracturing this joint here with this little elbow, which is part of the silencer, meets the silencer, because this weld here, and this car's 14 years old, this weld here, I just don't want to risk damage, don't want to risk fracturing it and causing more problems. It isn't a massive deal just to whip the panels off and just undo these 2 bolts and get the silencer off if I ever needed to change this one, should this one go bad. Some smoke has to be expected from new components, as they have usually a covering of oil to protect them during transit. Just applying some copper slips to the threads of these bolts for the rear crossbar using a toothbrush. This should clean up okay, and I can have that back in the bathroom by tea time. Time to refit this rear cross member. This is held in place by several T45 Torx bolts. Let's do them all up loosely until they're all in, and then finally tighten them. And don't forget this one that bolts in from the back here, each side. Cross member is all back on. It's nice just to have a final look at what I've replaced before I put the panels back on. Refitting the panels is the reversal of the removal. Please see my previous video, which I will link down in the comments, for how to remove the rear panels on the Smart. The only difference being that I removed this outer panel here in order to remove the main panels, and it has been suggested that there is a better way, and that better way is to remove these two nuts, remove this rear tailgate in its entirety and place it in the vehicle. So I'm going to be trying that ahead of refitting these rear panels. These are 15mm nuts, one each side. I'm going to remove just the one strap on this side, which is a T40, and then the tailgate just lifts up and fits neatly into the boot there. Now, in the past, when I've removed rear panels on 451s, there's been a little clip here which secures this in place. Now, without that clip, when we go to lift this up and refit this, this is just going to want to keep falling down like this. What I'm going to do is drill a tiny little pilot hole there and just put a very small self-tapping screw in there on each side, just to prevent that from happening. This really is a tiny little screw. And the same for the other side. Everything is back together and I'm very happy with the alignment of the panels. So on this boiling hot, humid day, we come to the final part of this video, and that's why did this happen? Now, the Lambda probe, that's electrical failure. That can happen at any time. When I worked with VW, Audi, Vauxhall, I replaced those under warranty on cars that were relatively new from time to time. So there's not much we can do about that. Yes, the chances of it happening with increased mileage increases as components wear out, especially something like an oxygen sensor, which is in a hot blast of exhaust gas all the time. It leads a really tough life. But the exhaust, the wear to the exhaust joints, in fact the total elimination of any ability of one of the joints to pivot in the way that it should, the answer there lies, I think, in part with this, the front engine mount. Continue watching for what I did with this. Now, this right here is a new genuine Smart front engine mount, and you'll see here that this inner piece is only supported by this bit of rubber and this bit of rubber, and this bit here and this bit here serve as buffers for this center part that moves. There is some webbing in here that you can see, but that's just there as part of the production process. That does nothing. So you can tell from this design that there is the potential for quite a lot of movement here, even on a new mount like this. Now, if you multiply that by a few thousand miles, this rubber softens, can even split and detach, and the end result is you get a lot of movement, which is evident when accelerating away from a start, decelerating, and also throughout gear changes. This puts quite a lot of strain on the sprung-loaded exhaust elbow joint to the turbo, which can cause premature wear. Now, in my last video where I removed the rear panels, I had some comments from Big Performance, and I've been asking about these Powerflex engine mount bushes, and they were instrumental in the development of these in association with Powerflex. So thank you for giving me some advice on this, because my concern was that fitting this would increase what they call NVH, noise, vibration and harshness at idle, but I'm sure that it's very negligible, and I'm going to show you what's inside here. Now, inside this kit are these inserts, and the idea is that we use this little sachet here of silicone assembly grease and place that around these inserts, and these then press in and fill in the voids, therefore tightening up this whole arrangement. So I'm going to be fitting those now, then fitting this front engine mount to the car, and when this car is all back together, I'll be taking it for a test drive and we can see how this changes the feel of the car. I fitted some cable ties to hold these two halves, these two inserts in place. Once this mounting is fitted to the car, this should be retained into position. Now, taking a look at this mount here, it is very easy to see when I pull on this nut that this mount has had it. It's partially split there, and there's a lot of engine movement. Remove the rear bolt. And loosen the front bolt and remove the mount. So at this point you realise how much engine movement there actually is on these, and the role that this mount plays in keeping things steady. So the mount's in position. Can refit the bolt. And realign the rear. So refit the nut on the other side here, and then retighten this and do final tightening of this. All fitted, all tightened, and it looks quite nice as well. Well, I've just got back from a really long road test, really good drive, and what a transformation. First of all, no engine management light, which is great. And secondly, in terms of the engine mounting, it is so much tighter. There's none of that lurching backwards and forwards and the jerkiness. I would say there is, as expected, a slight increase in vibration at idle. The engine doesn't feel quite so isolated from the cabin. It feels like it's a bit more in here with me. But I can deal with that because when actually on the move, it isn't noticeable, other than the fact that the vehicle is just a whole lot tighter and the gear changes are much better as a result of the lack of the lurching. I think I could probably just finish this off now by having the clutch adjusted electronically as well as the actuator adjusted mechanically, as I have in the past on my 450s. I think it's pretty much the same arrangement on the 451. But that's something I'm probably going to look into, because I think that would be the icing on the cake with this, and then it'll be absolutely great. So a success, a lot of work in this heat. It's really hot at the moment here in the UK, in the southeast, and that's just reminded me of one of the next jobs I do seriously need to look at on this, which is to get the air conditioning working. In reality, the next video on this car is probably going to be the rear brake shoes. I think I probably will do the wheel cylinders while I'm in there. I know I said they didn't need doing, but I've got them. I may as well get that whole lot done, and then I can bleed the whole system, do a brake fluid change and draw a line under that and know it's good for a long time to come. So hope you've enjoyed this. Please don't forget to subscribe. I checked again recently, and I think it's now 5% of people who view my videos have actually subscribed, which is incredibly low. I could have so many more subscribers if those who watch my videos hit that button. I would really appreciate it. Help my channel grow. Thank you very much, and goodbye.